Hauk Yahuch Anjak Hiwishka. Good afternoon. My name is Fawn Sharp. I serve as president at the Quinault Indian Nation and president of NCAI. NCAI is the oldest and the largest organization serving the leadership role of more than 570 sovereign tribal nations throughout the United States. And before I get into my remarks, I really wanted just to provide a little background about who I am and what really inspired me to public service and inspired me to attend Gonzaga. So I grew up on the Quinault Reservation here on the coast of Washington State. And I was 15 when I graduated from high school, and no one in my family had ever gone to college. And I went to our local community college to meet with college recruiters and at a college fair. And I learned about Gonzaga. And the thing that struck me as I read through all of the different college catalogs, Gonzaga really struck me as a school that would not only teach me a skill set, but prepare me for life and truly prepare me to meet the challenges of whatever discipline. I had the whole world in front of me, and I just knew that Gonzaga would be that place where I could find a home to not only gain a perspective globally, but also to know myself, know my strengths. And so I just want to do a shout out to Gonzaga and thank you for the invitation, because I can't imagine where my life might have gone without the foundation that I received as a teenager who never gone to college before, or had a family member to share those experiences. And so anytime I have an opportunity to engage with the Gonzaga community, I feel truly blessed and honored, and want to be able to somehow share what I've learned and the experiences that ultimately have a foundation at the school. So Siaklo, thank you. Once I went off to college and earned a law degree, I came home. So from 15 to 25 in that decade, I moved 17 times all over the United States, going through a bachelor's degree. I did a tour of duty with the United States Central Intelligence Agency, and then finally went to law school and came home after completing my JD. The next 10 years, I served as the nation's attorney and as a judge, presiding over criminal cases, as well as a judge for the Washington State Department of Revenue Tax Appeals Division. And after 10 years of serving as an attorney, our president announced her retirement. And at that time, tribal elders talked to me about running for political office to serve as president of the Quinault Nation. Initially, I thought they were crazy, because I don't come from a large political family. I didn't have at that time any political experience. But then it just didn't comport with my personal identity and self-concept. I thought, people I'm trained to seek truth, justice, fairness, and politics, tribal politics. But an elder pulled me aside and said, look, Fawn, this is an opportunity not to run to be a politician, but to be a leader. And a leader brings those virtues to office. And that's where my Gonzaga education really provided that foundation for what would be the next 15 years. My service as a president of not only the Quinault Indian Nation, but now the president of 574 sovereign tribal nations across this country. And those basic values and principles of knowing and understanding that as Indigenous peoples, we have basic inherent sovereign rights, that we've been confronted with centuries of injustice, centuries of inequities and discrimination and genocide. And how could we possibly lead during this time to bring about some sense of justice? And so over the course of the next 15 years, I found myself immediately thrust into the impacts of climate change. My very first year in office, back in 2006, I was all of 35 years old, not having any political experience, and then confronting this question of climate change. And back in those years, there wasn't a lot of discussion about the topic and subject matter of climate change. I remember listening to the presidential debates back then and just wishing somebody would mention climate change, and being disappointed debate after debate where there was not even a mention about climate change. But in those early years, I was informed that the millions of sockeye salmon that returned to the mighty Quinault were disappearing, that in the 50s and 60s, we had millions, but the year I got elected, we only had 3,000. And so I began a quest and a search, why is that? And I learned that the Anderson Glacier that feeds the mighty Quinault had disappeared. I learned the ocean is becoming more acidic. It's growing warmer. There's sea level rise that threatens our village that's located on the coast of Washington state. And so as a first termer, never holding political office, I was confronted with one of the most pressing challenges of our generation. We were front and center with the impacts of climate change. And so I really dedicated my life's mission and work to seek out knowledge and wisdom. And certainly in my prayer life, I knew that as a young tribal leader, I needed to directly address these very real issues of climate change, but also recognizing there are some injustices that ultimately led to our condition here at Quinault. And so at that time, we began to undertake some work around climate policy. And I was very frustrated that in this country, and even in our state, I would raise the issue of climate change, the room would get quiet, and then somebody would change the subject. And it was such an issue that once it's on the table, what do you do? What do you say? How do we even begin to confront the question of climate change? And so I made it my mission to go outside of the United States to engage in international policy around the issue of climate change. And my very first climate change session I ever went to was in Poznan, Poland at the Conference of Parties COP14. It was in 2009, 2 years after I had been elected. And that's where I really began to undertake work globally and internationally around the question of climate change. And over the course of the next 4 terms of my presidency, everyone else around started to begin to talk about the subject of climate change. And it was one of those topics that we knew 15 years ago that the scientists were raising the alarms that climate change is real. It poses an immediate and a significant threat. It's only going to intensify in frequency and intensity. And so today we are witnessing what President Biden has described as the cascading crises of our generation. Not only are we confronting climate change, we're confronting a global pandemic. And those of us, Indigenous peoples who had the least to do with this problem, are the most impacted. We're disproportionately impacted by COVID. We're disproportionately impacted by climate change. And we have little to no resources to really defend ourselves. But I believe we are living in that era where our ancestors foretold of a time when there would be a day of reckoning. There'd be some point in the future where others would see the crises as we see it. And as we see these multiple apocalyptic challenges facing our generation, it didn't happen in 2020. It didn't happen 10 years ago. What we're witnessing are symptoms of a much deeper imbalance that began centuries ago. And I believe that this generation is now prepared, ready, and many of us who are working in these fields have dedicated an entire lifetime to advance our rights, to advance fundamental policies and basic principles around environmental stewardship, around race and equity relations. And I believe that we are at a point in time where our generation is not only prepared, but we are ready for a national conversation around how are we going to not only support the rights of Indigenous peoples, but through an understanding that none of us are immune from this. We have to respect each other. We have to come to the table to develop meaningful, concrete, real solutions to the challenges facing our generation. We now have that space to come together. We now have that powerful narrative that demonstrates many of the calls to action and cries for help of our citizens are no longer falling on deaf ears. The entire world has witnessed in 2020 the impacts of the disproportionate. Many Native lives were lost during the pandemic. Many Native lives are lost to the impacts of climate change, our lands, our territories, and our resources. And so as we advance our policies around these apocalyptic challenges facing our generation, we are positioned so well at this moment. I've a year ago wanted to ensure that not only would our tribal nations meet the challenges, we would emerge stronger and more resilient. And I believe at this point in time, when you look all across Indian country with little to no resources, whether we had to shut down our borders, we had to stand on our sovereign authorities and powers to test, provide testing of our communities, COVID. And now with the vaccine rollout, we're finding that with every metric of providing a strict containment strategy, we are excelling and we are protecting our communities, just like our ancestors have in so many generations throughout the ages. They've had to confront much greater challenge with less resources. And so we are establishing that if we are supported and if we are understood and recognized as nations that have a great deal of knowledge and wisdom, that not only reflects our ability to advance new and emerging medicine, Western science and medicine around things like world-class vaccines, but we also bring to the table timeless ancient knowledge and wisdom around our traditional foods, our traditional medicines. And we are at that point where I believe in building an economic recovery plan and a public health recovery plan. All of those pieces are going to come together. We're going to be able to employ new and emerging and best practice and best science, but also our traditional medicines where ancient knowledge and wisdom meets new and emerging opportunities to provide real life solutions. And it's not only for our population, but as we can share our wisdom and knowledge about traditional foods and medicines, that too is part of the solution for all of humanity, and not just here in the United States, but the indigenous peoples globally that possess traditional ecological knowledge, where scientists are now finding those are best practices. So it's an exciting time for all of us to be facing challenges that are seemingly impossible. And we wonder, against the race to time, are we going to be able to meet these challenges? And I'm just so very confident that not only are we going to be able to meet these challenges, but we will emerge stronger. We will emerge in a society where there's equity, where we're respected, where we're reconciled to those foundational principles, where this country has been unhinged for so long. And so I'm just really excited at this point in time where we know that with all the experiences, we've faced multi-generational trauma within our communities, but we also have multi-generational strength. And so we are prepared for this moment. Now, the one other issue I really wanted to hit on in these remarks is the international principles within this state and globally around the rights of Indigenous peoples. Back in 2007, the United Nations passed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It was many decades of work that culminated in this basic document that understands and recognizes universal principles that transcend national borders. Among all of those policies was the policy of free, prior, and informed consent. And I'll just give you a basic example of what FPIC is what we call it. The policy objective of FPIC is to ensure that no sovereign country should ever be able to take unilateral action affecting the land, territories, resources of Indigenous peoples without their consent. And a basic example of that is the conflict at Standing Rock. So the Standing Rock people objected to a pipeline being constructed through their sacred sites and potentially polluting their waters over the objection of not only the Standing Rock tribal nation, but tribal nations all across the country and allies globally. There was still unilateral action to install an oil pipeline. And had we had the principle of free, prior, and informed consent, that would not have been allowed. And so how do we go from a basic principle that's set forth in an international document that's aspirational to truly effectuate the rights of Indigenous peoples, to be free from any other sovereign taking unilateral action to desecrate their sacred sites, to pollute their water systems, all of those things that we've just seen in this time and in this era come to pass for the rights of Indigenous peoples, even in this country, in the United States, in the year 2021, it's still happening. And so we set out on a mission to see that the state of Washington leads globally an effort to actually adopt FPIC, and not only adopt it as an aspirational principle, but adopt it in an enforceable right for the tribal nations here in the state of Washington. And I had an opportunity to discuss FPIC with our Attorney General, Bob Ferguson. It just popped up on my social media yesterday, as a matter of fact. He was heading to Gonzaga, and we had a chance to have lunch at the 13 Coins across from the airport. We introduced him to FPIC within 60 days. On May 10th, 2 years ago, our Attorney General adopted this principle of free, prior, and informed consent, effective immediately in the Office of the Attorney General. So while this principle and standard has eluded so many countries, it's aspirational everywhere else in the world, but here in the state of Washington, for the first time, the principle of free, prior, and informed consent was adopted as an enforceable right. And we also have had legislation proposed. Our Attorney General called on other attorneys general to adopt a similar policy, called on the state legislature to codify the principle of free, prior, and informed consent. And we are now starting to witness other states step up to honor those basic principles as it relates to the rights of Indigenous peoples. President Biden issued an executive order on consultation the first week in office on the rights of Indigenous peoples and with tribal nations. And we are now advancing FPIC in those circles. We are advancing FPIC with each of the the federal agencies to populate this principle. We are meeting with state agencies to populate FPIC. And so this is part of a broader strategy, but Washington State has set the example for others to follow. And it's our goal to continue to expand and work on FPIC as a matter of domestic policy, as I've described. But we also know and understand the United States has a foreign policy as it relates to the United Nations on implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I personally feel a responsibility not only to advance FPIC for the rights of the sovereign tribal nations here in the state of Washington and the 574 that we represent here in the United States, but there's over 100 million Indigenous peoples globally, and many of them don't have political structure like we have here in the United States. They rely on non-governmental organizations, NGOs, to advance their interests and to be their advocates. And so oftentimes I run across working with Indigenous peoples, and they are risking their lives. They are risking their lives to speak out on the plight of Indigenous peoples in the Amazon against some of the intrusion by mining companies. I've been at international climate meetings where their very presence in those forums are risking their lives. And so I feel just as responsible as a president of the 574 sovereign tribal nations to advance these fundamental values, but to know that in this very moment, there are other Indigenous peoples who are advocating and fighting and putting their life on the line just to voice a basic opposition to protecting their lands, protecting their sacred sites. And we are not only preparing a policy agenda that's going to protect the rights of Indigenous peoples here in the United States, but those hundreds of millions of Indigenous peoples globally who are disenfranchised, who are facing everyday acts of genocide, and it's happening in this era. But I am just so very happy to have any opportunity to share with others what we are doing within our tribal nations. And I personally believe that the work that we are advancing for our citizens is going to lay the foundation for the growth and the development and the strategies and solutions that we know right now people are contemplating for how we're going to meet this cascading crises of multiple apocalyptic challenges of our generation. And I'm confident that as long as we respect and honor our tribal nations, we respect and honor everyone who comes to the table who's impacted by these challenges, there's something to learn. And it's only in those circumstances where we can honor and respect basic fundamental values like the inherent rights that weren't given to us, but our Almighty Creator had a certain plan for Indigenous peoples. And our only prayer is to live as a Creator intended on the lands gifted to our ancestors when time began, and to be able to manage and steward our land and resources in ways that are consistent with our values. And while we've had little to do with the impacts that are creating the challenges that we're all facing, we recognize that many of the macro environmental challenges, it's out of our control. How are we going to put a melting glacier back? How are we going to take all of the acid out of the ocean? And so knowing that there are many things that are out of our control, there are those things that are within our power and control. And we have to honor each other. We have to honor foundational principles and values. We have to honor new and emerging science. We have to honor ancient traditional knowledge and science. That's key. And when we bring all of those together, we're going to be able to meet the challenges of our generation. And I'm just so very positive that years of wondering, are we actually going to address climate change? Are we even going to come close to stopping this crisis? Are the rights of our people actually going to be recognized? Or is this relationship we have with the state of Washington and with the United States just a farce? They talk about government to government relationships with us. We consult, they check the box, and they proceed with unilateral action to continue to desecrate our sites, to continue to pollute our water, continue to desecrate our spring chinook spawning habitat in the Quinault, over our policy objections, over our scientific objections, over our legal objections, over our moral and political objections. So many of us have felt over the years that this relationship is just a farce. We go through this exercise, but they still proceed with a predetermined unilateral course of action. But we see here in the state of Washington that is changing, and it's changing in a way that is providing an example to other states. It's providing an example to the current administration, and it's certainly providing an example by setting a global standard on how to relate to Indigenous peoples in a way that honors them as a creator intended. And so these are things that, as I look across the decades of work that I've done, and back to that time when I first arrived on campus at Gonzaga as a young teenager, I'd never been to Spokane in my life. And my mom was going to drive me to Spokane from Quinault, and her car broke down. I ended up having to get a last minute airplane ticket. I think it was like $70. I had some cash, and I was picked up at the airport by a group of nuns, and I had never seen Spokane before, but I just knew that first greeting and welcome from Gonzaga ambassadors that loaded all my belongings into that van and transported me from the Spokane airport to Dooley Hall on Sharp Avenue, that I was being welcomed to a place that would prepare me for an entire lifetime of public service. And as I look through the decades and reflect on those different places my career took me, the knowledge and the understanding and foundation that I received at Gonzaga has continued to not only inspire me, but continue to provide me with that basic vision that there are these fundamental values and principles. And if I just honor that, if I honor who I am as an individual human being with certain gifts and talents, that I can be part of this larger opportunity for us to just all come together in a way that we rise to the occasion. And while the challenges that we face transcend not only our generation, but we are part of that unbroken chain of advocates to serve our fellow humanity. And so I'm so very happy to provide these remarks, and I'm open to questions. And I just thank you from the bottom of my heart to be able to have this opportunity to share just a few thoughts about the challenges that we're facing, but also the opportunities. And I'm just so very grateful to participate any opportunity I have with the Gonzaga community. So with that, Siakwil, appreciate it.